One of the things that Prof does with the book is to weave in the contribution of our African ancestry to our way of being, our ways of thinking, our ways of relating. And our next speaker has spent much of his life thinking about, writing about, speaking about where we have come from, what that legacy means or ought to mean, and how we can utilize our history for creating the future that we, through our imagination, can conceive of. I'm speaking of Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies. Sir Hilary will make the launch address. Professor Beckles is the 8th Vice Chancellor of this noble institution, the University of the West Indies. His achievements are immense, and his contributions to regionalism, to Caribbean people having a certain sense of identity, and as well to unapologetically advancing ideas of our right and just desert to reparative justice in the wake of colonialism. Please help me to welcome Sir Hilary Beckles.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. I know the protocol has been observed, but allow me to recognize, of course, Professor Miller and my dear Sharon, Prime Ministers Patterson and Golden, and to recognize Peter Phillips and Maxine Henry, and Reverend Taylor, Reverend Reese, and of course, Mary, Lady Mary, my wife, and Ian Randall and Christine, our publishers, and of course my colleagues on the program, and all of those folks out there who are watching this program live across the Caribbean, Toronto, New York, and London, live on UBTV. There was a conspiracy of sort between the publisher and the author that I should speak for no more than 20 minutes. There is a rumor in circulation that I am one of those rehearsing to break Fidel Castro's record for the longest unscripted speech, 5 hours and 14 minutes. And nobody got up and walked away. But not tonight. But just to say that this event, of course, is very, very timely, coming as it does in the 60th anniversary of this nation. It is my norm that when I read an important book, I ask myself the question, what enduring concept has emerged from that reading in my mind? What is the concept that I will take away having read and having digested? And on this occasion, I came away with the notion that democracy in Jamaica is an incomplete miracle. Now, that might seem contradictory, but I do believe that those two words best capture the sensation of Jamaican democracy as an incomplete miracle. It's a miracle in the sense that to have even imagined that it was possible to forge a democratic culture out of that terrible, oppressive colonial history and the rubble of an extractive culture of economic wealth, leaving behind endemic poverty and chaos, that the people of Jamaica should even imagine that they could rise up and forge out of that colonial mess a respected, sustainable democracy. That is a phenomenal achievement at any moment in history. So it is a miracle, but it's incomplete because there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work to be done. It's the system of social living that is forged in the fight for freedom, but frustrated by the power of organized privilege. Now, I wasn't sure if I was honored or sabotaged by Errol for asking me to give this feature address. Because he knows quite well that reading this book for me would be an act of terrorism. Because he knows how I feel about this history and the challenges of the people to overcome it. And the persistence of optimism, despite the challenges, that better will come. Now, Errol and I have been friends for over 40 years. We met when I was straight out of graduate school and came to Jamaica, to Mona, in 1979 to begin my academic career. We met then, and we have been friends ever since. We have contributed to several discourses over the decades. While he was writing his book, Men at Risk, Gender Discourses in Jamaica and the Region, I was writing a book entitled Centering Women, Black Women in Colonial Caribbean. So we were both in the gender discourse at the same time. I have always admired his commitment to the region, to his nation, to the University of the West Indies. And the fact that we were born on the same day, we're both August 11, by the way. So we're August 11 boys. And so is Sharon. So imagine the triumvirate, the three of us born on August 11. And we've had a few drinks over the years. But I wish to bring a diaspora perspective to this subject. You know, my Jamaican friends are always too fond of introducing me as a Bajan, which really upsets me. Because when I think that I have spent half of my professional life in Jamaica and half in Barbados, I have spent as much time in Jamaica as I have spent in Barbados as a professional. My wife is Jamaican, my children, my sisters are married to Jamaican men. So what does that make me? There we go. The first time in my life that I cast a ballot in a general election was in Jamaica. First time, 1980. Arrived in Jamaica in the heat of the discourse. And I visited the home of a friend. And his father said to me, can you vote? I said, yes, under the laws of Jamaica, I can. Are you going to vote? I said, no, because I don't want to interfere in the domestic affairs of Jamaican people. The gentleman was so irate by what I said. He was so angered by what I said. He said, you live in Jamaica? I said, yes, I do. You work in Jamaica? I said, I do. You pay taxes? I said, yes, I do. Well, you have a right to vote, and you must go and vote. That affirmation of my political identity I had never forgotten. And yes, out of respect, I went out and I cast my ballot and entered into the world that Professor Miller has written about. I stepped into that world. I walked from the campus up to Papine. It was like a ghost town. How many of you remember that classic Western movie with Gary Cooper, High Noon? When all there was in the street was paper blowing down the street in the wind. Well, Papine was like that when I went up there to cast my vote and entered into this narrative, the narrative of this text. It's 500 pages, and this is the second volume. The first volume is longer. But if you wish to cut through 500 pages, you need tools, you need analytical tools to help you cut through. And of course, you need a methodology. And it was quite a challenge to read a text of this nature by a colleague who I have long respected, the quintessential university man, a scholar, a public advocate, and a public servant. That's the triumvirate we have always taught our younger scholars. Yes, you must be a scholar, but you must be an advocate of good public causes, and you must serve your people. This project is a monumental task of intellectual activity, literary sophistication, and celebration of that activist culture of nation building. Professor is the master of these three crafts. And we all know that a political culture is made up of ideas. Some of them might be dormant, but many activated. It is made up of institutions, some of them that work well, some are compromised and broken. It's made up of public discourses where different interest groups in the society articulate their self-interest. And of course, it's also made up of methods of measuring and monitoring. This book then covers all of this. It covers the mechanics of politics. these institutions. We speak of the Electoral Committee and Commission, but these are the mechanical features that hold the process together. It's an institution of measurement and evaluation and monitoring. But it's also an institution through which you can see personalities at work and how personalities project ideas and visions. In other words, it's about the inputs and the outcomes of a specific historic moment. Miller's work is that of the expert observer who has witnessed, who has reported, and who has assessed. I would venture to say that while academics have a responsibility to be scientific and to be balanced in our analyses, I would venture to say that Errol Miller has no equal in terms of the presentation of the historical and contemporary data on the Jamaican political culture. I have experienced and lived through 40 years of this. And the prior years, I have researched as a historian of Jamaica. Thus, I have come to the conclusion that the democracy we live, we enjoy, we celebrate is an incomplete miracle. But it has deep roots in the history of the nation. After emancipation, when you go through the Jamaican archives on those decades after emancipation, and the black people are demanding to have the franchise, they're demanding to have access to the purchase of land or a rateable building so they could qualify for the franchise. There was a tremendous enthusiasm to participate in the electoral system. Local government, general elections, there was a tremendous political fervor about entering into this culture and owning this culture, despite what the landowners and the merchants wanted to do. There was a tremendous aggression to enter and stay in. But that was only one part of the culture of contest and conflict. There is another contest and conflict that needs to be studied in more detail, and as I stand here at this moment, it has not been effectively studied, yet it's so important to Jamaican history. It is this. And of course, from time to time, it bubbles up into conversation about governance in the Maroon communities and the relationship of those governance models to the national constitution. It bubbles up in that. But what it really is a deep ideological clash between the Ashantis and the Igbos of Jamaica. And it hasn't been effectively studied, but that is what it is. That in the first 100 years of Jamaican colonization, when the sugar industry is emerging, and the Africans who are being brought to Jamaica are coming out of the Gold Coast, and most of them are Asantes, and some of them are Gab and Fanti, but big chunk of them were the Asantes, and the Asantes were the most highly organized political group in West Africa because they were building an empire across Africa when the slave owners moved against them, captured and brought them to Jamaica. And they declared total war on the plantation system. They declared war on the planters, on white supremacy. They retreated to the mountains and launched their warfare. That was the Asante Revolution. But the system persisted. And in the 18th century, when Jamaica surpassed Barbados as the largest slave-based society in the English Empire, when 1 million Africans were brought into Jamaica in the 18th century to build this plantation system, the vast majority of them came out of Igbo land. Igbo. So now you have your Asantes in the hills, and you have your Igbos in the valley. In other words, you had Ghana in your hills and Nigeria in your valley. The Asantes had committed to total war until the revolution was complete. The Igbos were farmers, agriculture people who loved the land and cultivation and village and church. The Jamaica we know today, that rural Jamaica, that old Jamaican civilization, that is Igbo. Love of the land, love farming, community life, village, church, family. The only place in the Caribbean where people plant the yam on a stick is Jamaica. That is Igbo culture. Only the Igbos do that. In Barbados, we plant the yam, the vine runs along the place. When your grandmother said to you, go and dig up the yam, you have to go and trace the root. All across the Caribbean, when other African civilizations spread, only in Jamaica, you plant the yam on a stick. And when you are driving through Igbo land in eastern Nigeria, it is Jamaica. Because the Igbos converted rural Jamaica into Igbo land, thus creating a systemic clash at the heart of black identity and politics in Jamaica. So we need to, Errol, in understanding this so-called conflict, violence, and tension in the society as it's emerging out of colonialism, it's critical to understand this ethnic tension that persists between those folk who just wish to plant their crops, live in peace in their villages, go to church on Sunday morning, and those who are the carriers of an ideology of black domination against white supremacy. That persists deep. It's the incomplete aspect. It's an incomplete aspect of the democracy miracle, the incomplete miracle. And if we fast forward into 62, if you read the archives on Jamaica, the Imperial Archive on Jamaica, as the people of Jamaica took that bold and heroic step to push forward into independence against every headwind. I will give you two slight quotations to give you a feel of this, so you could sense that tension which Errol writes about in the institutional mechanical development of the democratic frontier. A British official from the Colonial Office, writing to Secretary for Colonies Reginald Maudlin about Jamaica's decision to press through with independence and to break that colonial bondage. An official Kirkness, this is what Kirkness wrote. They, meaning the people of Jamaica, they have little claim on us. And our object should be to give them the least we can. We can get away with a good deal with them on a take it or leave it basis. If they want independence, let them have it, but on our financial terms. That set the framework. It set the framework. Then we have a statement from High Commissioner Morley. Many of you of PJ's generation would remember High Commissioner Morley. High Commissioner Morley was asked a number of questions by his Prime Minister back in England. Are the Jamaican people ready for independence? This is a letter that is found in the archive under the name of R.W. Thompson, but with a stamp of the British High Commission, because R.W. Thompson was a guest of High Commissioner Morley. And this is what it says. Jamaica is no more fit to govern itself or for democracy than is a month-old baby ready to change its own napkin. You have to journey through those archives on Jamaica to feel that contempt for Jamaican democracy, the idea that Jamaican people should revolt against the British Empire and go on their own. This is why I say democracy in Jamaica is a miracle, because the odds, the forces against it, both internally and externally, and to have been able to forge a system, as Prime Minister Golden said, that works. There's some challenges, it works, but it's incomplete. That we know. And the question now is, what will be required to complete it? To complete it, to allow the miracle to shine. What will be required? There was the Ushera moment, and the Walter Rodney revolution in Jamaica, when the poorest of the poor and the Rastafarian people and all the others, the young people, were calling for greater democracy, more multiracialism, greater inclusion of the poor into the system. The system vibrated. And we read in the book the analysis of that vibration. The system was vibrating under this demand for more equity, the demand for more justice. I remember having this conversation with Prime Minister Manley. We at the Cayfield campus had invited him to Barbados to give the inaugural Frank Worrell Memorial Lecture. And you know that Prime Minister Manley would never going to reject an invitation to speak on cricket. That was his heart. And I should tell you, he gave the most magisterial, magnificent lecture I ever heard on the history of West Indies cricket. But in a side moment, I said to him and asked of him, why has Jamaica been unable to implement what we call the Barbados education model, where all Barbadian citizens have a right to publicly funded education from primary school to university level. publicly funded education, primary, secondary, and tertiary for all children. Now, the circumstances of that policy position is interesting. At the moment of Barbados' independence, 66, the same conversation that took place in Jamaica, 62. But Errol Barrow, who was leading the charge, called a summit with the plantation owners, all the plantation owners and the Bridgetown merchants. And he said to them, listen, you own 80% of the land, and you held that land from slavery to today, where slavery is over. You no longer legitimately own that land. We have a mass of illiterate black people on the island who must now be educated. So here's your choice. You either allow the government to appropriate the lands and push through a land redistribution strategy, or you allow an excessive but very special tax on your property, and that tax is specifically to take this mass of illiterate black people and take them through primary, secondary, tertiary at the expense of the state. And you will fund it. So you have a choice. We're offering you a social contract. The elite of the island thought about it, and they came back and they told the Prime Minister, we'll take the tax. We'll take the tax. And they sign up for the tax. And that tax has become the basis of social transformation. Now, remember what happened 8 years ago when the IMF put tremendous pressure on the government. That was Mr. Barrow's party, and they retreated from that and imposed tuition fees on Barbadian students. The entire society went into quiet opposition. Now, that's one of the features I should tell you about the Barbadian electorate. You know when they're done with you. They have nothing to say to you. There is never any public. When they are done with you, they have nothing to say. It is just silence. But everybody knew that they had broken the social contract. They had pulled the rug from under the black people, and they lost every seat. Every seat. Complete wipeout. Next election, complete wipeout again, because the social contract was breached. The basis on which a community was able to emerge was pulled. So I said to Mr. Manley, Prime Minister, I said, why can't we push through an agenda to take all of these poor people, children in Jamaica, and take them through a process? The energy, the creativity. I'm a teacher. I've been teaching in Jamaica for 40 years. I know Jamaican children. I know the creativity, the intellect. It is phenomenal, the energy and intellect in the Jamaican poor. They just need liberation. So, and I remember Mr. Manley's response. He said the landed classes of Jamaica will never agree to it. They will never agree to it. And so this book brought back all of those conversations. Prime Minister Patterson, I came to a better understanding of your leadership, having read this book, the instruments that were available to you, the systemic relations through which you had to advocate your thoughts and your vision. And I do not know if this is an appropriate description, but I came to the conclusion again that your governance was the search for a consensus at the center. A search for a consensus at the center to pull the democracy together, hold it together, so that a common vision can be the basis of electoral politics. And I have no doubt that that is still what is required. A strong consensus at the center. Errol, thank you for digging deep and coming up with this monumental piece of work. Authorship of classical works is oftentimes painful. And I know the pain of literary creativity, but that is what Sharon is for. To help to ease that pain of writing surrounded by all of those documents and manuscripts. But the people of Jamaica, you have a social contract with the people of Jamaica. They have confidence in what you have done. They respect your commitment. You have helped to validate institutions of governance, and your reputation and your integrity gave validation to those electoral institutions. That is an invaluable contribution. This book emerges from the engine room of Jamaican electoral politics. And it is authored by a master mechanic who is down there, sleeves rolled up, knowing the sound and the rhythm of that engine. And you were there in the midst of it. And all of us have come to respect what you have done. And we do not take it for granted. So thank you for the opportunity to read this book and to comment upon it. And now I'm looking forward to speaking at the launch of Volume 1. And if I'm allowed to speak at the launch of Volume 1, I do not wish the publishers to tell me I have 20 minutes. Because I would love to be more expansive. Thank you so very much. Thank you.